founder and CEO of Magnify Wellness, which is an international nonprofit whose mission is to ensure that everyone gains equal access to mental health support through outreach programs and technology. We have another amazing mental health innovator here. Her name is Ariela Safira, and she founded an incredible startup that is transforming how we access therapy, and it's called Real Therapy. And we also have Michaela Brewer, who will introduce herself now.
Yeah, hi, I'm Michaela. I am the Director of Writing at Magnify Wellness, and I'm super excited to be here and in this conversation today.
I'll give a little background on me. I'm Ariela. I'm the founder and CEO of Real, a new mental health care company based here in New York City and available nationwide throughout the US.
That's amazing. So we're just going to dive in with a little bit more about what Real is and how you guys are impacting the mental health space. So Ariela, can you tell us a little bit more about your journey to creating Real?
Yeah, definitely. So I've worked in mental health care for, 6 going on 7 years now. I became very passionate about it when a friend attempted suicide, and that was really my big eye-opener as to what mental health care looks like. It was the first time I'd ever seen a rehab, first time I ever saw or understood therapy and psych meds with a mature mind, and didn't think the system made sense. I wasn't a therapist. I was actually studying math and computer science at Stanford as an undergrad, but was curious as to why the system functioned the way it did, and frankly didn't believe it was functioning correctly. So threw myself at it, got in touch with David Kelly, who's the founder of IDEO, and I ended up spending a few years working with him on how can we redesign the mental health care system, visiting rehabs, therapy offices, architecture firms that built those spaces throughout the country to learn why does mental health care function the way that it does. I then actually left Stanford. I thought I would drop out entirely, and David convinced me to return. So I ended up leaving for a year to do a bunch of mental health research and would eventually come back, graduated from Stanford. I biked across a bunch of countries to fundraise for suicide prevention. I joined Sidewalk Labs, which is a Google company designing the future city, the Care Labs team building City Block, which builds redesigned primary care and behavioral health care clinics for the Medicaid, Medicare population. Stayed to put up the first clinic, learned a bunch about the insurance side, and then joined Columbia's clinical psych program to train to be a therapist. And while I was there, I saw the system didn't make sense, both for the client and for the therapist. So I dropped out of the program, successfully dropped out this time, dropped out 2 years ago to found Real. And now we've really built this omni-channel approach to care. So both a brick and mortar platform and a digital platform that's making care really solving for this issue that mental health care today is really not something, or mental health today is not something that most people attend to until they've reached rock bottom, right? Most people don't access a therapist or even like meditation, to be honest, until they've lost a loved one, until they've attempted suicide, until they've gone through a miscarriage. And that's comparable to a world where we don't see a primary care doctor until we've had a heart attack, right? You can imagine how much poorer our health would be if we waited until such a crisis to see a clinician at all. And we can imagine how much less effective that care would look like if a clinician had no documentation as to what our health looked like until that crisis, right? And it's really what therapy or mental health care today looks like. And we're really changing that to instead be this proactive form of care and something we always engage in. And of course, to change that, we need to change a few things. 1, we need to make care more affordable. 2, we need to make it more clinically effective. And 3, we need to change the brand and experience such that it doesn't represent this negative, this feeling of like, oh, I'm here because I'm doing poorly. And instead it needs to, what our understanding of mental health care needs to look like is this needs to be something we're proud of, right? This needs to be something that we think like, I come here to be stronger, to be better, to be more emotionally intelligent, as opposed to I come here because I'm ill.
I love that. Yes, absolutely. Like therapy is so stigmatized. Like if you were talking to someone and you were like, oh, I'm going to therapy, a response probably would be like, oh, like they'd have like this preconceived bias that you're mentally ill or you're hitting rock bottom, when the reality is that maybe you just need someone to talk to.
And we all need someone to talk to. I think, we've really concepts like the midlife crisis, now the quarter life crisis, should tell us that by not speaking about these things, and it's not just speaking, it's working on it, right? Understanding ourselves deeply, understanding one another. Like, as a result of not doing that, we've now completely normalized and socialized the idea of a midlife crisis. Like, that's problematic that every movie could joke about that, as opposed to thinking like, what can we do to avoid losing ourselves at 45? And now it's happening at 25, at 18, right? How can we instill this notion? This is so much more than a doctor's appointment. This is like living a full life, right?
Right.
Yeah. I know you've talked a lot about too before, like this whole idea that like therapy is kind of for the emotionally elite in that way. So I guess, yeah, we wanted to ask about like, yeah, could you dig into that a little bit more, and like how is Real maybe kind of combating that?
Yeah, Abigail, I'm not sure if Michaela shared that with you, but essentially one of the learnings that have come out of a lot that we've done with Real is, how I like to phrase it is, traditional therapy might have been a fine idea, but it's for what I call the emotionally elite. It's for the people who have the language to talk about what they're going through, right? Have the language to talk about their recurring nightmares, have the language to talk about how they feel about their body image, their stomach versus their thighs, how to talk about rape and assault, right? And not only have the language to do so, but then have the courage to do so in front of a stranger, right? And I think, or I know that the assumption or the thinking in therapy is put someone in a room for long enough and they'll get there, right? I'm not sure if I believe that, but even if that were the case, I think when that room costs $300 an hour, what is more likely to happen is someone's going to quit using that room, as opposed to actually reach, the depths of their being and work on them. And something that I care about personally, and I care about Real accomplishing, is actually meeting people where they're at, right? I think a lot of the healthcare system asks people to meet the healthcare system where the healthcare system's at, as opposed to acknowledging like treatment is only successful if we mold ourselves and change ourselves being the system to what people look like, right? We need to build a system that's meeting people where they're at today. And today, most people don't know how to answer how they're doing with more than 2 syllables, right? I'm fine, I'm good, I'm okay, right? Maybe that's the most syllables. We really need to offer like education around like, what are words to use to describe these recurring nightmares. I often use that example because obviously I'm such a proponent of mental health care and have been for a while. And I had not acknowledged, let alone said aloud, my recurring nightmares until the fall of 1 year ago, right? Because I'd never seen a role model for discussing that. It's so been a concept in my brain that was never seen in a social setting, was never said aloud by another person. And I never thought to say it aloud until like a coincidental lineup of events resulted in me saying like, oh, right, I also have the same nightmare like every 3 days, right? And I think it's such an example of like, we look for role models in terms of like how to act, how to speak, how to do. And for most people growing up, the only role models for depth was talking about like work sucking and dating sucking, right? We might have seen our parents talk about work or employers being not great. We might have seen movies talk about dating sucking, but we've really never seen in pop culture and families like what it looks like to talk about any substance, right? Most dinner conversations talk about like, how's work? Fine. Are you married yet? No, right? And so much what we're doing, and I talk about often, is it's so beyond like clinical efficacy and doctor's appointments. It's like building a society that actually has depth. And like right now we have pretty on the surface society.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you say. I find myself guilty of this when someone asks me how I'm doing and I just automatically say, oh, I'm good. Like, but in reality, I have a lot on my plate and there's a lot more to the surface than there is. But it's something that is something so ingrained in society for us to be like, oh yeah, I'm good, or I'm fine. And we need to be more vulnerable with each other. We need to have there's power in being vulnerable and voicing how you feel. But to start that, we need to change the system. And so you mentioned how that Real is, for the emotionally elite. and how, so they're like, it's for the emotionally elite, and oftentimes therapists say these like clinical jargon that, you know, may like push people away from getting the help that they need. So what does navigating away from the clinical side of therapy look like?
Well, to clarify, it's not that real is for the emotionally elite, it's that today's system.
Yeah, I meant to say that.
But yeah, what does it look like to navigate away from that? Part of it is really building a different language, a much more relatable human language around mental health care. You know, part of, I like to say it real, like we have a 5-person clinical team and they are experts at clinical efficacy. Clinicians know clinical efficacy. Clinicians were never trained on engagement, right? Clinicians are these things that I think a lot of wellness, just brands, consumer forward brands are experts in engagement. We know how to speak to the 25-year-old, the 30-year-old. We know what their day-to-day looks like. They've studied that and mastered it. And we separately have like healthcare clinicians who have mastered, like, I know it actually improves a human being. And something really unique we have at Real is an actual org structure and a team that merges both individuals and ensures that they collaborate with one another in our pathways, in our events, in our roundtables, ensuring that how we talk about these experiences on our website and our app is consistent with the language people use in everyday scenarios. And the actual design of the experience, right? The slides we're using in them, the journal prompts we're giving, we're ensuring they speak a language that you and I speak in everyday settings. And we're doing so by ensuring it's not clinicians are sharing, this is what's clinically effective. And then we have our experience team and our copy team or our marketing team actually playing a role in saying like, yeah, I get what you're saying. Like the everyday person has no idea what this means. Right? Or like, wow, this session is a jump. I would be horrified and quit, right? And it's not just certain individuals in the team representing that, it's actually sending out surveys and working with a group of like beta testers, if you will, to ask like, how does this land with you? What do you think when you see this? And ensuring there's a real, like, if I will, like human-centered design of associated with this and actual like potential members communicating and listening, hearing from people what works. I think so much of the healthcare system was built by healthcare people. And this idea of even like user testing and user-centered design is it's such a colloquial phrase in Silicon Valley and the Bay. And there are a lot of like, obnoxious associations with it, but there's this real beauty behind it. Like the people who should be designing products are the people using them, right? Like I don't think it's the physicist who should design the physics class. It should be the person who doesn't know physics, right? Who's saying like, this book makes no sense to me. Like, if you want to teach me physics, this needs to make sense to me, not to the PhD in physics teaching it. And I think in so many ways, our entire healthcare system, and certainly our mental health care system, was built by the equivalent of the PhD in physics.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, yeah, it definitely has to be some kind of feedback loop, especially from people who have either lived experience or just are somewhat acquainted with mental health. And and I'm interested what your thoughts are about like one-on-one therapy and how that kind of plays into all this, because I know you talked about that a lot too, and how it definitely has its downsides and its upsides. But yeah, I'm interested how you think that maybe plays into this.
Yeah, so I think that comparing mental health care to fitness can sound reductive. And I also think that fitness is like an understood concept enough to people that, to me, the best analogy is one-on-one therapy is to mental health care as personal training is to fitness, in that just it is restricted by the number of trainers or therapists available. Therefore, a minority of people, like if we're going to build a system that actually impacts all Americans, a minority of them will have access to one-on-one. Like that's already the case today. What percentage of Americans can afford, let alone actually use one-on-one therapy, right? It's a numbers game. And it's not just numbers, it's also an like experience decision. Like I don't go to one-on-one therapy, right? I engage with my mental health care on a daily basis, right? And it's not through one-on-one. And maybe I will go for 6 months, and I shouldn't be restricted to one-on-one. Like my mental health care regimen should not be restricted to when one-on-one works with my schedule, when one-on-one is affordable to me, etc. So I view it as a part of the experience and a very valuable one, but a much one, an impossible one for everyone in America to engage with, or everyone in the world to engage with. And even more than that, like outside of impossibility of costs and numbers, like just not an ideal experience for everyone. I think something we're learning is that, like, I wholeheartedly believe in the group model. And to this day, I think like I definitely think one of the greatest innovations in healthcare, and maybe I'll even say one of the greatest innovations across all industries, is AA. I think it's like, it doesn't get the credit it deserves, but AA is a proven model. Like, we get people out of an insanely challenging addiction, right? And we do so not through a cool algorithm, but through the power of people, right? And I think that we've at Real very thoughtfully think of technology as like, there are a lot of great innovations it brings, and it should power, like it should scale or power up the power of people, right? And like, really in the end, like, it's the things we should learn from AA is often people need accountability. Like, one, they need accountability. I'm going to show up next week and I'm going to commit to not drinking because humans who look like me and who have been in my shoes did this. And also I'm going to, outside of accountability, I'm not alone in this, right? I'm not alone in this. And even more than that, what AA tells us is you need to separate someone from their everyday environment and bring them to people who look like them for them to change. You don't tell the alcoholic, keep going to the bar every night, right? And keep hanging out with people who drink and just learn how to say no. Rather, you acknowledge this is freaking hard, right? And it's hard enough even without like other drinkers for you to stop. Don't go to them and say, let's put you in an environment with people who look like you, who openly identify the way that you do, and who are accomplishing the same accomplishment you're working towards, right? I think that's what I'm so fascinated by that, what groups can do, and acknowledging, I don't think one-on-one is enough. You can give an alcoholic a one-on-one therapy session every week, but if they're still hanging out with alcoholics every night, it's just humanly impossible to get over this addiction, right? And I think when I think of real success and just a successful mental health care system, I think it's so much more powerful and deep than a one-on-one can offer. And it's changing societies and communities and cultures. And AA has done it remarkably successfully. And I think a lot of substance abuse organizations have done the same. And I'm just excited to bring that beyond the substance abuse category.
I absolutely love that. Echoing what you're saying about, like, you can't stop someone from doing something if they're just being put in the same environments they were trying to get out of. So it's so important to have people that they can feel like they can relate to, that really look like them. And that's what I think both Real Therapy and Magnify have in common. Like, it's a really big group where we all share like a common goal, and we are all going after the same kind of thing. And yeah, it's absolutely amazing. So I'm wondering, there's a lot of downsides of one-on-one therapy. There's some upsides and everything, but why is there why, in your opinion, do you think that there's even a stigma in the first place to accessing and getting therapy?
Yeah. I mean, the system of mental health care was built out of crisis, right? It was built out of, like, you think of, how we thought of like mental wars, like, oh my God, someone just wanted to kill themselves, throw them in a white box. Like, it was built from not how do we intentionally build a society that's mentally well, but rather how do we protect society from someone who is mentally unwell, right? It was and then as a result, we ended up building these like prisons for people who showed they were unwell, which made everyone else want to hide any potential like negative thought they hide that from the world, because they saw what happens when you show up as unwell, right? Like, the concept, or rather the phrase around the bend, that's what was used in the UK to describe mental wards, which are now at least called inpatient mental health facilities. Around the bend, literally, it was a way of very literally explaining that they would hide these inpatient mental health facilities around the bend so no one would see them. And then they would use the phrase, like, if someone had a panic attack or any sort of meltdown and ended up in one of these inpatient mental health facilities, they use the phrase, he's around the bend, as just like, we're hiding this individual. And how we thought of I'm now actually forgetting the word for when someone's in a lockdown. Anyways, when someone presents as dangerous to themselves or to other people, we put them in a completely blank room that's locked up. And the thinking behind that, which wasn't like thoroughly researched, there aren't papers with large sample sizes that prove this is correct. It was a very emergency situation of, oh my God, they're freaking out. Let's put them in a room that has nothing else in it to ensure that nothing provokes them. And of course, what they weren't considering is isolation itself provokes them, right? What is scary? It wasn't the picture frame of the loved one who passed away. It was feeling alone because that person passed away, right? And we just haven't applied the innovative thinking that we apply to video games. We have not applied to the healthcare of individuals, right? So very long-winded way of saying, where this comes from is probably just this domino effect of we built this system from a place of crisis, and our approach was fear. We were afraid of these people, afraid of how they might impact others. And I think any system that's built out of fear will result in more fear, right? Whereas we build this exercise, this fitness industry out of strength, empowerment, such that no one says, no gym markets itself as come here so you no longer have to be fat. No one says come here so you don't need fat thighs. They come here to be strong, come here to be great, come here to be fit. And they do such a good job at that the fittest people still show up, right? It is not even close to a sign of you come here because you're unwell, right? Whereas we market the mental health care system, and the brand of the mental health care system is come here if you're unwell, right? Have you ever heard of a therapy offering outside of Real that says come here to be great, come here to be amazing, come here to feel strength and confidence? It's all wrong.
Wow.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I just, lived it.
And you're Michaela, so I'm sure you can compare basketball versus therapy.
Yeah, there's a huge stigma about what mental health looks like, and if you're going to therapy, what that kind of paints a picture of for you, I guess. Especially as an athlete too, that was really challenging. But I'm curious. There is definitely this issue where people are unwell sometimes, and as people supporting them, I think a lot of people don't necessarily know what to say or how to point people in the right direction, whether that's to therapy or whatnot. So either through your own experiences or through Real, I guess, what have you learned about either reaching out to people or supporting people, or kind of which direction to point them in when they are unwell?
Yeah.
Mental health, yeah.
I hate how cheesy this is, but I do think the first thing to do is to validate their feelings. The most isolating experience is finally mustering up the courage to share where you're at and having the first response be I don't believe it, which in more ways than people realize, their responses are that, right? What do you mean depressed? My depression manifests differently, right? And there's the absolute first thing that should be said is yes, I believe it. And this is your story, right? I think it's another, first step. There are a lot of individuals who then first don't believe it. So don't do that. And then there's the next subset of individuals who they assume the best thing to do is to share oh, me too, I'm the same. And I do think it comes from a good place of, part of it comes from this good place, I want to show you you're not alone. But actually, in my experience, it really minimizes an individual's story of oh, no, don't just crumble it into I told you for 2 minutes I'm depressed, and you saying oh, I get it, I've done that before, right? And so I think step one is validate it. Step two is hear that person out. And I don't think the answer is even, I think we're being too short-sighted when the response is go to therapy. That's similar to someone saying I'm struggling with learning, go to school. The solution is not school, the solution is not therapy. It's all right, well, we have to understand ourselves. The solution is understanding yourselves. Maybe one mechanism to get there is therapy. It might not be. For some, it's church. I'm not religious by any means. For some people, it is that, right? I love to say, I deeply believe in mental health care. I don't go to therapy. It's my father, my most empathetic human I know, taught me emotions, right? Taught me wellness. And for me, it's my dad, right? And so I actually think it's really doing a disservice to individuals by even saying it's therapy that's the answer. It's like you as a friend, as a peer can show up. And I certainly believe there's a place for professionals, 100%, but I think we're doing our entire culture a disservice and like not realizing how powerful an individual is if we tell them, point your friends to the direction of therapy. It's like, you could show up too, right? And like, there's a time where you can't be the full-time clinician, right? And there's a place where someone needs professional help such that they're in a rehab, right? An inpatient mental health facility, but don't give up so easily and say like, you need to go to someone else. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was really well said. I feel like in our, since this system has been like such a domino effect for so long, and my generation, we have so much going on with like the pandemic and wanting to be perfect and comparing ourselves. And in the age of social media, I even find myself comparing myself to other people. And so this kind of perpetuates feelings of like doubt, and you don't really know how to actually voice your feelings. And when you finally do, maybe the parents are from an older generation and you're just like, oh, well, just keep working hard. And it just kind of, invalidates your experience. So it's so important to just say that you're there for them. So I 100% agree with that. And so as you are an incredible mental health innovator and advocate, so to anyone else who is those things as well, what is your call to action for them?
So my brain just said, do it. It's probably my way of saying, if people don't, I think especially in mental health, mental health care is like this, I'm going to sound harsh, but mental health care is this topic that everyone claims as their passion. Like, I think it's the most consistent. I'm passionate about mental health care. I'm passionate about mental health care. And I don't think you have to be building a like next gen mental health care startup to prove your passion. But I do think that it's a positive thing. Like, so many people can feel a connection to this, right? It's amazing. It's so many people. It's very quick for them to realize like, yeah, that matters. And society isn't showing up enough for it. I think that's phenomenal. What I want to encourage everyone to then do is do something about that. Yeah. Right. And it's not, for me, 6 to 7 years ago, it's not like I immediately said like, I'm starting a company. It was, this doesn't make sense. I'm going to talk to people about it, right? I'm going to talk to people who work at rehabs and therapy offices and architects to learn, why is this room bright white, right? And like, what does it take to change it? And I'm not surprised people don't do that. I don't think it's, I think they weren't taught it. Just like we don't have role models to talk about mental health care. We don't have so many role models that show like, what does it mean to act on your curiosity and to act on your cares? And so now is, I hope someone hears this and acts on it and says like, why, if it is such a passion of mine, like it is for many, that should validate it. This is clearly an issue. So many people can empathize with this idea that like, mental health care is underserved. And so do something, and don't just, hand your friend off to a therapist, though I think it's very amazing when people do that. Like, you can show up yourself, and there are ways that we can be trained, like crisis text line, an amazing training program, right? And I'm a counselor in crisis text line. I'm so shocked that I got that training for free. Like, you can show up as a counselor, you can become a therapist, but even outside of that, you can show up in nonprofits, you can build a startup, you can work at those places. And it's so unfortunate that people have to think 10 times before they consider working in mental health care, but they can all join Facebook and Google, which have great initiatives too, to be clear, but they don't think twice about why they're working at companies that build foods that make Americans unhealthy, or companies that build video games that teach young boys and girls bad habits, right? Like, if we're going to go ahead and instill bad habits in this country, in this world, if you're willing to do that and claiming your passion for mental health care, like, why don't you show up for mental health care in the same way you show up for video games?
I 100% agree with that. Mental health is a very, I think I agree with you. It's a buzzword right now. And I think it's great that we're all coming together and we want to do a change, but we actually have to do it. Like, we actually have to, more than just, make a post on Instagram, we actually have to make that change and really show up for our friends and family. So I totally agree. But yeah, I think that concludes all of our questions. Ariela, it was amazing having you. She is an amazing mental health innovator and is doing great work. And so we will see you guys for the next episode.